Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This is his newest release that just came out last week and I have some thoughts. Basically, this book is a story about a young man who's high school age, I believe he's like 17, who is like a sports star, and when he was younger his mother passed away. And this caused his father to become an alcoholic, and he started drinking heavily, and their life kind of went downhill. His dad cleans himself up, and Charlie is kind of at a good place in his life. And there's this, basically a house that an older man owns who supposedly is very mean, very scary kind of thing. He's got a huge scary dog, and one day Charlie hears him yelling and hears his dog barking really loud. So Charlie goes over and sees that the man has hurt himself, and so Charlie calls 911 and tells him he'll take care of his dog. Without revealing too much about what goes on in that time, Charlie ends up finding a portal to a fairy tale world. And that's like the basic premise of the story. I don't want to get into spoilers. First, let's start with the characters. Charlie, as a main character, was compelling. He was definitely an interesting narrator to follow because he is in the thick of it and he has a unique perspective on everything going on. However, I found a lot of these scenes with Charlie just to be very annoying. He was very repetitive. He constantly was comparing every single thing that happened to something in sports. And he also constantly brought up all of this really bad stuff him and his friend did a while back. And he makes it very ominous, and some of the things he mentions are just really not that bad. Like, they're bad, but it's just like typical kid stuff. It does get to a point where they do something pretty bad, but again, it's like the way he like foreshadows all of the stuff that he says he's done, it just makes it sound like he like murdered somebody or something, and then like you get to like the big bad thing he did, and while it was bad, it was like, well, I thought it was gonna be something like they murdered their teacher and buried them in the forest. Like, it didn't feel that severe. He just felt very naive, which again, he's 17. I don't know, being a Stephen King story, I went into this book thinking it was gonna be like a darker, scarier version of like fairy tales and stuff, and instead it almost read like a YA coming of age story. Like, it didn't even feel like an adult novel. Continuing on with the characters, the dad was a very interesting character. I felt like his relationship with Charlie was really great. I feel like the whole like recovering alcoholic angle made him seem like a very great guy. He was a good dad to Charlie. All of their interactions felt very real and very touching. The old man was adequately mysterious and scary and nice and all of those things. The whole plot line with Charlie watching this old man's house and his dog and stuff really reminded me of the movie Monster House, like animated movie, because it had that same vibe of like this old man living in this scary haunted house basically, and doesn't let anyone near. That's kind of like the vibe it gave, and I really liked that. Those are the main characters of the book. There are other characters once you get into the fairy tale world, but none of them felt fleshed out much at all. I never felt connected to any of the characters after we went through the portal. I didn't feel like they added much to the story. They were more like set dressing. I just didn't feel like they were fleshed out at all. There comes a point where the story kind of takes a turn, and if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. But all of the characters that were around Charlie at this point, I was like, I can't remember who's who. I don't care who's who. Like that whole time that Charlie was with these people, I was like, this is so boring. I didn't want to read it. I was like, it was so hard to continue. Now onto the plot. A lot of the plot felt a little predictable. I'm going to mix in my thoughts on the pacing while I'm talking about the plot. The first chunk, when Charlie is in our world, I felt like I was engaged. I wasn't absolutely loving it, but I was like, okay, I see where we're going. There's this cute coming of age. There's this scary old man. Like, a lot of the plot devices that were introduced really felt justified and interesting. And then after we went through the portal, the entire story and like pacing ground to a halt. Like everything that happened after that was just boring. Charlie ends up in this area where I was talking about earlier with all those characters I couldn't remember, and I just didn't care. It was boring. The big bad evil people were just like stereotypes. I felt like a lot of the fairy tale aspects that I was expecting were not really there. Like there was definitely representations of fairy tale people and creatures and things like that, but none of them felt fleshed out. They all felt like caricatures, and while that might have been intentional, I still feel like it made it boring because I just didn't care. I didn't care about anyone around Charlie. I didn't care about any of the plot stuff that was happening. Like, since we had already established this place for him in like on Earth, in the real world essentially, I just felt like everything was just a means to an end to get him back there. And I didn't care how we got there because it wasn't entertaining. Like everything just felt so boring. I forgot to mention in my little character section, the best character in the books is Radar, and that is the old man's dog. Charlie takes Radar into this fairy tale world because she's old and dying, and there's a way for him to help her if she comes with him to this fairy tale world. Radar, hands down the best character. She's incredible. She's a big German Shepherd, and she's just lovely. She listens. She's a great doggo, and she's the best part of the story. So the whole fairy tale world just really did not feel like a satisfying plot points. Like the whole time we were there, I was just so bored. And honestly, if I was not listening to the audiobook, I probably would have DNF'd the book because I just felt like it was going nowhere. I feel like the ending was satisfying enough and was like a good wrap up to the story, but it wasn't enough to have made me enjoy such a boring story. A lot of the people I've been talking to said that the first part they really loved. It was gearing up to be an incredible Stephen King book, and then the fairy tale world ruined it. And while I get that, I didn't even think that that beginning portion was that good. Not bad, I thought it was boring. And I think that this book may have taught me that I just don't really enjoy coming of age stories, because that's really what this felt like. And maybe that just doesn't work for me, because I feel like every coming of age story I've read I find to be a little boring. I don't know why that is, and I think that's just a personal preference kind of thing, so I think that's why I wasn't clicking with it like everyone else was in the beginning. And then the part I was in it for, this fairy tale world, was just disappointing. I was really hoping it would become like Brothers Grimm, dark fairy tale retellings with like gore and horror. And instead it was just like Charlie being this valiant savior of the fairy tale world, and with some fairy tale characters sprinkled in. And it just didn't feel gratifying. It didn't feel interesting. And everyone I've talked to, like, I honestly don't think I've seen one person be like, this book was great. Almost everyone I've talked to that has read it, even huge Stephen King fans, are like, yeah, this one's not for me. So I think I'm going to be returning my copy, because I listened to the audiobook before I even got my physical copy in the mail, so I didn't enjoy it. So I think I'm going to return my copy and get Wall of Storms by Ken Liu instead. So here we are. Overall, I think I ended up giving the book a 2.5 stars. It was riding at a 2 until the ending. I think the ending was cute and satisfying, and I liked kind of how Stephen King wrapped up that whole story. So that kind of bumped it up a half star for me. This one just didn't click for me, and I had such high hopes for it. It's probably the first Stephen King book I've ever read as it was released. So I was really excited for that, and I knew it was going to be like a fantasy story, a portal fantasy, and I was so excited to read a fantasy novel by Stephen King, and this one just wasn't it for me. I think one of my biggest letdowns, and it's my fault, is the expectations I had going into it. The reason I really like Stephen King's books are the horror aspects. I like his scary stuff, and I know he writes stuff that isn't scary as well, and I normally find those books to be ones that I just don't gel with as much. And I think it's because I really appreciate his horror, and I appreciate the scary and the gory, and I went into this thinking that's what this was going to be, And that's on me, I guess. I knew the basic premise that it was like a portal fantasy, but I didn't realize how much of a coming of age story it was going to be. And honestly, it read like a YA book. There was like some adult elements, but like those adult elements could have been in a YA book as well. I honestly felt like this was a YA coming of age fairy tale story, which is cute for the right audience. That audience just was not for me. I think the pacing was subpar. Oh, I forgot to mention, me and a group of BookTube friends were dunking the whole time on how bad Stephen King writes teenage dialogue. This man does not know how teens talk. And it was so funny. All of the like little like quips he would say, thinking it sounded like a cool young kid said it. And I was like, no one says that. Like he said something was mondo stupid, and I was like, no one says that. And then like he also like sprinkled in a bunch of like weird political like commentary that didn't feel necessary. Like it felt like it was him like virtue signaling and being like, look, I'm woke. Like I know what the kids are talking about these days. I know all of the social justice issues going on in the world. And Kyle over on Read by Kyle actually pointed out there's a point where Charlie is in class and his teacher mentioned something about Philando Castile being shot by police, which is a obviously very awful thing that happened. But it happened like 3 years after the year that this book is supposed to be taking place in. So it's just like, it just felt like Stephen King was trying to throw in these discussions without actually, like, they didn't need to be there. They weren't adding to the movement itself, and they also weren't adding to the book. So like, there was just no reason for them to be there. It just felt like Stephen King being like, look guys, I pay attention to the news. And it just was unnecessary. Overall, just a disappointing book for me. I went on a little rant there because I forgot to mention it earlier, but it didn't hit, and I'm disappointed, and here we are. I hope this didn't come off as too much of a rant review because I don't think it's like the worst book out there. It just really didn't work for me. I just think that this one was not his strongest suit, and that's okay. That's okay. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more reviews from me, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. If you could like and comment on this video, let me know what you thought of this book, or if you're planning on reading this book, I would love to hear it. Those things all really help a channel grow, and I'm trying to reach out to more people and make more bookish friends because isn't that why everyone makes a booktube? Thank you guys for watching. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.